Ever imagine yourself on a safari in East Africa, but like 2 million years ago?
Yeah.
You know, lions, elephants, gazelles, but also humans. Well, not exactly us.
Right.
Today's deep dive, we're going to use those excerpts you sent over from Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens,
Great book.
to learn about those early humans. What was up with them? How did Homo sapiens end up on top? What do you think?
Well, it's amazing to think for, like, most of human history, we weren't really all that impressive. Harari, he makes a big deal out of that early on in Sapiens. Early humans, they were just trying to get by like any other animal, not exactly the masters of the planet yet, you know?
Not at all. And get this. Turns out it wasn't just Homo sapiens hanging around back then. There were other human species too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it wasn't just us in the Homo genus. So before we even get to what made Homo sapiens so special, can you give us a crash course on how scientists even keep track of all these different human species? I feel like I need a bigger family tree or something.
It's true. It's easy to imagine human evolution as this straight line from, apes to us.
Yeah.
But it's more like a bush, really, with tons of branches. Scientists, they use those terms species and genus to kind of organize it all.
Okay, so species. I get that, like a group of creatures that can, reproduce and all that. But what about genus? What's that all about?
Genus, think of it like a bigger category. Groups of species with a common ancestor, like lions and tigers, leopards, jaguars. They're all separate species, but they're all in the Panthera genus because they share an ancestor way back when. Same with us. Homo sapiens, that's our species. Sapiens is like our little branch of the family. Homo, that's the genus, the bigger group we're part of, along with those other human species Harari talks about.
Okay, see, this is already way more interesting than history class.
Yeah.
So who were some of these other members of the Homo genus? What were they like?
Similar in some ways, totally different in others. Take Homo erectus. These guys were around for almost 2 million years.
Wow.
That's way longer than Homo sapiens, by the way.
No kidding.
They were adaptable, spread from Africa all the way to parts of Asia. Real long-distance runners, those Homo erectus.
2 million years. Okay, they win the endurance award. But what about those hobbits I've heard about? That always sounded like something out of, like, Lord of the Rings to me.
Homo floresiensis. The hobbits of Flores Island.
Right.
These guys were, well, they were small. We're talking adults about 1 meter tall, max. Imagine that. Grown-up humans, shorter than a first grader.
That's crazy. Why were they so small? Was it the island or something?
Probably. It's called island dwarfism. Happens with some other animals, too. Limited resources, bigger animals, over time get smaller.
Huh.
Homo floresiensis, they're like, they're a reminder that evolution, it doesn't always go in a straight line.
Not at all.
Oh.
Speaking of our ancient relatives, we got to talk about Neanderthals. Growing up, I always picture them as like, hunched over, really hairy, living in caves.
The classic caveman image.
Right.
But Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis if you're feeling fancy, were much more complex than that. Harari talks about how they were intelligent, big brains, even bigger than ours on average. They were adapted to the cold, Ice Age Europe, made tools, buried their dead. There's even evidence they might have had language, maybe even art.
Wow. It's incredible to think about all these different human species living at the same time. Makes you realize it wasn't a given that we'd be the ones to, take over. So what was it about Homo sapiens? Why did we end up as, top dog?
That's the big question, isn't it? What made us so special?
Right.
Scientists are still trying to figure it all out, but Harari, he points out a few key things that gave Homo sapiens a leg up.
Okay.
But even those advantages, sometimes they came with a downside, like a trade-off.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't all like sunshine and roses for our Homo sapiens relatives.
Yeah.
Like, you'd think a bigger brain would be like an automatic win, right? What's the downside there?
Well, think of your brain like one of those super powerful computers.
Okay.
Amazing what it can do, but it uses a ton of energy. Our brains, they're only about 2% of our body weight.
Right.
But they use like 25% of our energy, even when we're just relaxing.
Wow.
Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, their brains only use about 8%.
So it's like, what? Our brains are like gas guzzlers?
Mm-hmm.
And the chimps, they're driving Priuses.
Something like that.
But seriously, how those early humans get enough calories to keep those big brains going?
That's the million-dollar question. Probably where diet comes in, right? They had to find ways to get more calories. Maybe that's what led to better hunting or new ways to gather food.
So it's not just about eating more, it's about, like, eating smart.
Exactly.
Harari. He said there were other trade-offs too, right? Like, with our bodies.
Definitely. One big one, physical strength. See, to make room for those bigger brains, we had to give up some muscle.
Yeah.
We weren't the strongest of the human species. Neanderthals, they were much more, how do I put this, ripped.
So it was like brains over brawn.
You got it.
It's wild to think, those early humans, did they have any clue what was going on? Like this whole evolutionary thing playing out.
Who knows what they thought? But those big brains, they did give us some advantages.
I would hope so.
Like, for one thing, walking upright. Bipedalism, the fancy term.
Oh, right. Standing up, walking around on two legs.
It seems so normal to us, but it was huge for them.
Freed up their hands, right. Imagine no hands.
Exactly. They could carry food, tools, whatever over long distances, build shelters, make art, all while walking around. And that changed everything.
It's amazing how one little thing, well, I guess standing up isn't that little, but still.
It's the little thing.
It changed everything. But wait, you said it even like indirectly changed how humans evolved. What do you mean by that?
Oh, right. Well, take childbirth, for instance. Walking upright. It changed our hips, made childbirth harder for Homo sapiens.
Really?
Compared to, say, chimpanzees, it's actually one of the things that makes us human.
Wow. So we're like literally built differently because of walking.
Pretty much.
Huh. That's wild.
And speaking of babies.
Well, yeah. Human babies. They're so much more helpless than other animals, right?
Oh.
Like a baby gazelle can walk like right after it's born. Is that related to the whole big brain thing too?
Exactly. Human babies were born with, well, kind of underdeveloped brains compared to other primates.
No kidding.
Part of it is those big brains we were talking about, they wouldn't fit through the birth canal otherwise. But it means human babies, they need a lot of care.
So we developed strong communities because of our needy, big-brained babies.
Think about it. Someone's got to find food. Someone's got to protect the group. Someone's got to take care of the little ones. You need cooperation.
Makes sense.
That's what probably pushed us to develop language, complex social structures, everything Harari talks about. It was essential to our success as a species.
Wow. So walking upright, eating more, needing more calories, taking care of helpless babies, it all ties together, doesn't it?
It's all connected. But remember that other big turning point for Homo sapiens?
Oh, you mean fire. Like, yeah, way back then, fire wasn't just about, staying warm or scaring away animals. It was a total game changer.
No other species had anything like it. Total game changer.
Speaking of game changers, what about those other humans we were talking about? Like, at some point, Homo sapiens, we started moving out of Africa, right?
Okay.
Ran into those other human species like the Neanderthals. What happened then? Did they, have big battles, or was it more friendly?
I know. If we only had a time machine, right? But Harari says it's complicated. We don't know everything. He talks about two big theories, though, about what happened when Homo sapiens met Neanderthals. Interbreeding and replacement.
Okay, so interbreeding, that's like they,
Got together.
Yeah, exactly. We're early humans into that whole love is blind thing.
Well, maybe not blind, but definitely maybe a little more, how should I say it? Open-minded. This theory basically says there was some mixing going on. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, hooking up.
Interesting.
Maybe not a ton of it, but enough that it left a mark on our DNA.
But you're telling me, I could have some Neanderthal DNA in me.
You and me both.
Get out of here.
Remember Harari talked about those DNA studies? They found that most people with European or Asian ancestry, they've got a little Neanderthal DNA.
No way. So it wasn't always like a clean break between human species. Huh. Fascinating. Okay, but what about that other theory, the replacement one? Sounds kind of intense.
A little bit, yeah. That theory says that Homo sapiens, we basically outcompeted Neanderthals. For food, for land, everything.
So we were more resourceful.
Could be. Or maybe we were just better at adapting. Harari says it could have been fighting, but it could have also just been that Homo sapiens had a slight edge.
So over time, Neanderthals they disappeared.
Basically.
That's kind of sad, Yeah. Our ancestors, they might have played a role in another human species dying out.
It's definitely something to think about, right?
It is. What if Neanderthals were still around? What would the world be like?
That's a good question. Would we even be having this conversation?
Right. It really makes you think about how we got from, struggling to survive on the savannah to, all of this. It's a wild story, isn't it? Full of surprises. And we're still learning, which I think is pretty cool.
Totally. And it's a good reminder that we don't have all the answers. Like Harari said, language was likely a huge part of how Homo sapiens succeeded. But what about Neanderthal communication? What was that like? We're just starting to figure that out. So much left to learn.
Exactly. Every answer, it's like, it leads to more questions. It's awesome.
So that's what makes it fun.
Totally. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone.